Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Walking Dead World Beyond. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, picking up where last week's episode left off, we had this mysterious stranger popping up, and we find out his name is Percy, and he just, at first, it's kind of like he's got a stick pointing at them, and the others are just kind of like, what are you doing? Like, there's a couple of us, it's like, back away. You guys leave me alone, and I'll just back away and just kind of walk away. But then it's like, why'd you come confronting him in the first place? But Felix has got his back with a gun, so it's like, yeah. So you have Iris offering him. I think it was Iris that was offering him food, and obviously he talks about the fact, because obviously the question comes up like, where's his stuff? And it's just like, he's like, I don't have any stuff. And it's just like, good for you to be out here. There's no way you don't have any stuff. So at first, part of me was immediately thinking like, oh, he must be like someone must have sent him out. So it's like the rest of his people must be out there like ready to strike or something like that. But it's like, no, it turns out he was with some people, but he got robbed. And he talks about the fact is that he wants to track down those people that robbed from him because it's, because some things in this world can't be replaced. Because people are like, it's probably best not to go after this person. He's like, it's not out of revenge or, some principle of the matter. It's like just some things that can't be replaced, which out of anybody, obviously they kind of resonated with it, but I think out of the most, Elton kind of resonated with it because obviously there are just some things that can't be replaced. And obviously this guy is a very smooth talker in the sense that he's good at captivating you with these stories, because he talked about this story he thought he heard a horde coming towards him, and he got on top of a car and was stayed on the roof of it or whatever and was ready just to accept his fate, but he opens his eyes and it turned out to be 200 bison or something like that. So which is kind of interesting. It's just kind of that thing of him being oh, I'm done, but he was yeah, because of that it made me go no, I'm not ready to die yet. I'm still here, so I'm going to live this life, whatever this life is now, and it's so interesting because Iris is the one that's so they were all kind of captivated by his story, but Iris is the one that's the most captivated until until Hope figures him out, because she's like, wait, what? Something about your story is BS. And then she's like, how'd you get the here to there in only a couple of months? How'd you in such a short amount of time? It's that doesn't make any sense. And then it's oh, your car, that's what was stolen from you, and it turns out that's what he had, which obviously makes you more suspicious because why lie about that? But he's yeah, it's a car, a running car in this day and age. It's of course that's going to be a hot commodity, so the last thing you want is to tell people so they can end up going after it on their own, which Felix was if we wanted it, you already told us where it was, we could get it ourselves without you. But Iris is suggesting they work together to get the car back from the people that stole it, but it's no, it's kind of, the group is kind of split because Silas is kind of against it, Felix is against it, but Elton is saying with the element of surprise in their numbers, they could end up getting the car back without too much issue. Because I think this situation initially kind of presents itself in a very interesting thing, because obviously it's not just the dead or the empty or in his case the has-beens, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was why were they calling that? Oh yeah, because as in supposed to be has-beens, as in they were as supposed to being the past tense of been, or being, it's supposed to be the past tense of that being has been. So I was oh, that's interesting. Once again, every group's got their different names for it. Walkers, the empties, so on and so forth. It's actually kind of interesting. But what I was going to say would have made this situation interesting from the get-go. It's this would have meant confronting humans. They haven't done that. Obviously, they're just getting used to dealing with the dead. And even then, they're still kind of lacking because obviously it's all been, none of it's been hands-on. It's all been almost, theoretical, because it's all been taught to them and stuff like that. Yes, some physical training and stuff like that. But obviously, none of them had any real-world experience until they left the university. So it would have been an interesting thing of because the fact is Iris is so trusting of this guy, but it's oh, you learn really quickly in this world, because that's a complicated thing of who's a friend and who's an ally. Obviously because it's also coming from the perspective of we've watched the original show enough. Once again, just even from where I am in the Fear of the Walking Dead, that you can't always trust people, that people can be monstrous in their own right. So, but Iris is kind of giving, Percy the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, Silas isn't too happy because he likes her. He likes Iris, and I don't know if he's quite figured it out. Or at the very least, he hasn't really told her. But, because obviously, because Felix is like, oh, you're back here with me, no, because of my charming conversation and stuff like that. He's like, I don't trust you. You don't trust that kid. He's like, no, I don't. He's like, I don't get why everyone likes him so much. And it's like, you can't control who you like. And I think it pisses Silas off even more because obviously for him, it's like, he's already had so much resentment from other people about his past. And I think for the first time, one of the people he's gotten close to really look past all that, kind of see him for him, is Iris, seeing that he could be more than, so I think that's what, once again, they're teenagers, so, he probably just hasn't really, either he hasn't figured it out himself, or he just doesn't know how to put it into words, the fact is how he feels about Iris, so seeing them get all close and everything. Obviously, Percy brings up the whole thing of like, oh, you left a cushy university and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, it wasn't as great as you think it is, but it's like, it's easy to say that from an outside perspective of the situation of like, oh, like it's a cushy place. It's like, yeah, it had its complications, but even then you're like, I mean, to their benefit, if they had stayed, they'd most likely all be dead right now. So, it worked out for them, once again, unbeknownst to them that it worked out for them in this regard. But, at the same time, there's the whole Elton thing I thought was kind of interesting, him with Hope, because Hope's asking more. So like, oh, what was your mom like? Because I think, and this is an element to the episode, I think she wants to get to know his mom more, because obviously it's like, I think it's also to like, it's confronting her guilt, because like it's just like, oh, there's some pregnant woman that accidentally killed my mom. Like that's all she knows about her, but to kind of get to know her, humanizing her, which is going to be probably a benefit and a detriment, because it's going to be a detriment because it's like the more you get to know about this person, the more guilty you're already going to. I mean, you already feel guilty enough because it was already bad enough having did what you did, even though it was an accident, even though you were a kid. But the fact is, now you realize, like, oh, one of the people you're traveling with, someone that you've gotten close to, Elton, that was his mom. You took his mom away from him. And especially later on when Elton talks about the fact is that their dad reminds him a lot about his mom. It's like the little things that their dad does, like the way he handles a lot of stuff, it's like it reminds him of his mom. And, it's like he's actually said that Leo's the one that inspired him to, like, he read my mom's research and was like, oh my god, like this is actually really good, and understood it, and he was suggesting that Elton be the one to finish it, so that what is now his mission was inspired by their dad. And you can tell that eats away at her even more, because Elton's trying to do his best to get them to their dad. It's like whatever helps get to your dad faster, right? So I think that just adds more and more to her guilt. I think maybe she figures if she gets to know Elton's mom a little bit more, maybe she could alleviate some of that guilt. But you can tell she wants to tell him, but she can't bring herself to do it, because it's like, how do you bring up that conversation about, especially because Elton brought it up last episode that he knows it's crazy, but there's some part of him that's hopeful that his mom's out there. He's like, yeah, there's a part of him that figures maybe she's not, but then at the same time, there's still that hope. Does Hope want to be the one, once again, the irony behind it, to be the one to take away his hope, by telling him the truth that, hey, your mom's not out there anymore, that she's dead, that I, in fact, killed her because of a complicated set of circumstances, but it's like, Hope hasn't forgiven herself for it, so there's no way, I'm sure in her mind, it's like, there's no way Elton would be. I mean, this is his mom, it's like, obviously, like, it's sad because, like, it's because, because obviously Hope blames herself most for her own mom dying, and it's, not even really blaming Elton's mom, but it's just like, it's just a complex situation to be in. But obviously, they track down the vehicle, and what was it, like Mike and Tony who have the vehicle. Obviously, one of them was driving it, and it's like, all right, we should, follow it and try and, steal it, but what are we going to do? Like, because, Percy's like, oh, I can hotwire it and everything, but it's like, even now, Silas being like, we shouldn't do this, because now the whole thing is like, well, what are we going to do? They have to kind of make a decision, and I thought it was kind of interesting how Iris, out of anyone, was so adamant about it, but I think on multiple levels it came about because, one, I think there's a part of her that was thinking, like, this is a faster way to get to my dad. The sooner we get this vehicle, the sooner we can, like, the more ground we can traverse easily and get to my dad faster. It's that, but also it's like, here's something that's in front of us. All we have to do is just kind of do it, because I think because she ends up saying it to Silas later on that she's like, we can't just be afraid waiting for someone to save us. And he was like, are you talking about me? She's like, no, this is about me. Because I think for her, she's always kind of scared to take any risk because she tries to be very pragmatic, I think. And it's so interesting because I think this is an episode where I feel like she wasn't necessarily the most pragmatic that she kind of tries to be. I mean, to be fair, she's gotten less and less pragmatic because it's just, I mean, the fact of the matter is coming out here on your own and everything technically wasn't the most pragmatic thing to begin with. But it was just interesting. Like, I don't know whether it was just because it was Percy, or I think it was more so like her wanting to be like, because obviously they've had help along the way, so she wanted to do something for herself. So it's like, I'm not just going to sit here and wait for someone to fix the problem for us. I want to help. I want to do something. You know, it's like the whole point of us coming out here was to be able to do this on our own. If we're just going to have people helping us, like if we're just going to have Felix bailing us out or just having other people do it for us, like what's the point? We're not going to grow. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to change. You know, so she decides to go in with Percy and Felix, and obviously they eventually like find the room where the dude is in and get the key. And obviously, you know, it's like, okay, I'm gonna steal from them. I'm gonna steal back what was taken from me, and I'm gonna steal some of their stuff. You go ahead, take the key, just get it running. I'm like, is this gonna work out the way they think it? And you hear the guy go, you hear Percy go, no, and you hear a gunshot. I'm like, oh, I was like, did he hit? I was like, damn, dude. I was like, that sucks. Because I also thought this would be interesting too, because like obviously that's something they've never had to really deal with, like people they know dying. Granted, yes, everyone at the universe is dead, but they don't know that yet. So this would have been a little bit different. But instead of running and just leaving with the truck, she came back for Percy. But then slowly but surely it gets unveiled. Because at first, like I like how they presented the scene, because at first you see, obviously, because of the gunshot, everybody's distracted. But Silas is looking like straight ahead, and he's missing like the dude's body getting up. You're like, oh shit, oh man, Silas, watch out! And then all of a sudden, home dude starts moving like a normal person, still on their shit. I was like, oh my god, it was a trap. It's like, holy. I mean, this is the perfect circumstances for that. I mean, this is, you know, getting played in this world. Once again, just humans. You never know if you can 100% trust anybody. So Iris slowly figuring out, like, wait, this whole thing is a trap. She goes back. The bags are, like, just trash in them. She goes check that room where the dude was supposed to, like, Mike or whatever was supposed to be in there. But it's like, it's just an empty. And then she sees, you know, him jumping out, sees Percy jumping out the back. And she ends up falling into, like, a dumpster or whatever. And it's like, man. So not only did they get robbed, but he's taking off with the vehicle too with Tony, and it's like, I was like, wow, you guys got played super damn hard. Luckily, you know, well, because obviously, like, unluckily, Iris fell in there with a whole bunch of empties are in there, plus there's more approaching, and it was already going sideways, but luckily Percy and Tony came back, running over a few. Gotta appreciate the shot of them running over one and its head going squish and it running over. It's like, oh, you just kind of had to set up that shot just to witness that. But it turns out, like, side note, that actor who plays, because it turns out that's his Uncle Tony, that actor, you've seen him in, I don't know his name, but you've seen him in stuff. I just can't place him. Like, I don't know his name, but I feel like he has such a familiar face. I'm like, I've seen you in some stuff. I just don't know what. And I can't think off the top of my head what I've seen him in, but I feel like I've seen him in stuff, you know? He's just one of those actors, like, you're like, I've seen you in a bunch of stuff, I just, off the top of my head, can't place a single damn thing. But it's like, oh, look at how grateful they are. We saved him and everything. Really grateful for the fact is that, oh, yeah, you saved us after you were robbing us, so does that make up for the fact is that you were robbing us? You know, because it turns out Tony's, like, a magician / illusionist, and it's like, yeah. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Goes hand in hand with being kind of the con artists that they are. But this is their way of conning people without hurting them. Obviously, Iris didn't appreciate it. It's like, oh, I guess you guys deserve medals. Because for her, she bought into it. She actually kind of cares about Percy. Like, she kind of, but she feels, well, it's more so because she thought, like, oh, I had a grasp. She's like, I thought I had good instincts. But the fact is that I trusted you and I didn't see your skin. Like, the others were at least a little reluctant, but I was the one that was kind of gung-ho about, like, no, but let's do this. I trusted you, and it came back to bite us in the ass. But obviously, it's like, you are, you know, you do have good instincts, because what happened, even though it was fake, you still came back for me. He's like, I ran this scheme 1,000 times. No one's ever done that except for you. So he's like, I want to, be a little more like you, So him and his uncle are going to drive them where, obviously, because he knows that this is about finding their dad and everything. So presents a very interesting angle to this whole thing. But also it turns out like he's aware of like Tony knows about the symbol. He's like, oh, that symbol you got there. He's like, yeah, it's from the university we're from. It's like, no, it's BS. It's like, how do you know? And he pulls off piece of like from the truck, and it's got that symbol. It's the Republic. It's like, okay, so this truck is theirs as well. So he's a little bit in the know about them, like obviously them being well equipped. But the reason why he was able to run this scam on Felix and them, because he knew they weren't them. Because they've been doing all they can to try and avoid them. Because obviously there's, they know a spot where they could get some fuel, but obviously the Republic's like running around and it's like they're fully armed to the teeth. And it's like, you'll be able to get us by, right? And he's like, yeah, with this symbol and proof of where we're from, which, once again, the detriment of Felix and them not knowing the truth. Because now begs the question, what happens the moment they become the Republic? In particular, Elizabeth becomes aware where exactly they are. Because it's like, once she found out that, like, Iris and Hope weren't there, it was almost like she was happy about it. Now, I guess the whole point is to get them there to where their dad is so that he could be maybe he's avoided doing whatever work he needs to do with them. Maybe that transmission from their dad was actually the Republic trying to draw Iris in, because it's like, if we I don't know, why not just bring them there if that was the case? I don't know. It seemed like Elizabeth was kind of happy that they weren't there. That's why I'm kind of confused by if we were going by what I was trying to suggest, like using them as leverage to get their dad to work, but why not just bring them yourself? I guess because if you try to you already massacred everyone, so I guess going about things the way they did, it would have been hard to just wouldn't have been the easiest just to get Iris and Hope there. Without too much of a fight from the rest of the university, but also from them. At least this way, they think they're going there on their own. Maybe not. Like I said, I'm probably reading too much into it, and it doesn't necessarily match up with everything that's going down. But still, it felt like she was kind of okay with them being like, okay, good, they left or whatever. And I'm like, I don't understand why. Or maybe she was just glad. Maybe she felt bad, like, oh, I got to do this, but at least they got away. I actually do kind of like them and whatnot. Maybe that's what that's about. Maybe not. We'll ultimately, have to wait and see on that front. But obviously, we're going to be running more into the Republic in this situation. Obviously, Felix, like I said, thinking because they have their relationship they do with the Republic, he thinks that maybe it's going to be a situation of, we're going to be able to get what we need and go. But maybe not. Well, most likely not. Obviously, we also have to wait for Huck to get back. We'll find out what she scouted out. But we also got 2 more people added to the crew. That was interesting. I wasn't expecting this group to grow beyond, Huck, Felix, and the kids. I wasn't expecting that. But, who's to say this group doesn't end up growing a little bit more as they progress. Side note, the actor who plays Percy, I feel like I've seen him in something too. I just don't know what. He seems like he's got a familiar face as well. But it was interesting, that little I don't know what you'd call that. It's almost like a puppet show, but it's like shadows and like little cutouts. I don't know. I think there's a proper terminology for that type of show. But it was interesting because at first it's stuff a little lighthearted. And you're like, oh, and they're smiling and everything. But then it gets super dark when you see like all the world basically get turned upside down, the dead, killing people, rising up and everything. But the end of it, but it does, I was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. That's kind of effed up. But it is flipped around because at the end it comes off a little more hopeful because there's a flower growing and then you see people gather. So I guess it's supposed to represent that despite the terrible stuff that happens, like there's still life that can be birthed from this death. It's like, the world keeps going. We can keep going. I don't know whether that's supposed to be when it's all said and done, we can get back to something better than this, or maybe like the message is, I think despite everything, that there's still hope, that there's still life in this world of death, So it's a little more of a hopeful ending at the end. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But obviously, like, Iris had the whole thing about, like, she doesn't know which parts of Percy, like, were real and what were fake. And obviously, Hope is like, we're all like that. There are just certain sides of ourselves we never want other people to see. It's like, he's no different from us. And I think, Hope, that resonates most with Hope, who also had that whole thing, asking... because obviously in the episode she had suggested to Elton, which I didn't even bring it up, but obviously Elton's name comes from Elton John, just because, like, obviously that's what his mom was into, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But the fact is that Hope had promised Elton that she was going to help him, like, do whatever he needed to, give her pictures or samples or whatever. Like, I think it's just for her, it's like, she feels personal responsibility for taking his mom away from it. It's like, this is her life's work, which is now his life's work, so she wants to do it, because in some shape or form she thinks maybe in some shape or form it might make up for what she did. That's a whole complicated thing, which is also interesting too, because it kind of ties into, like, Silas, because Silas, it's like, he makes it, talking about the fact is that basically Percy makes it seem so easy to start over. And even Felix is like, yeah, because obviously, like, starting over, it hasn't been the easiest thing for him either. Like, obviously, even he's kind of, a couple episodes back thinking about his parents in his past, like, especially because he wasn't too far from his home. But obviously, like, changing and becoming, starting over isn't the easiest thing. At least they're not finding it to be that case. But somehow, Percy's able to, and that's, I guess, also in the sense of, despite him screwing them over and everything, he's probably a little better off. He's still okay in Iris's eyes to a certain extent, so I'm sure that doesn't help. But interesting stuff. I'm curious to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.